We're going to talk about the international investor. Australia might be a big country geographically, but economically it's quite small. The amount of goods and services we produce each year, to give you some idea, it's about $1.8 trillion. Where in the US, it's $20 trillion, and in China, around $13 trillion. So how we interact with our global investment partners is very important to our very small economy. To recap, if we look at the series of videos, we learnt about the up phase and the down phase. We learnt about the drivers of an economy, the population broken down into households, companies, and the government. How hard that population works and earns income, and how much it earns allows it to then borrow more money, and earnings and borrowings together create spending, which is tracked by gross domestic product. Let's have a look at the gross domestic product for 2018 and how it all worked in conjunction with our international investors. Gross domestic product was $1.8 trillion in 2018. There was consumption, which is 56% of that, investment, which is 34% of that, and right now I want to focus on the investment side of things. And it's mostly companies that invest money, what have they invested into plant, equipment, new projects? So 34% of gross domestic product is from investment spending, and the Department of Foreign Affairs says that about 12% comes from international investors. 12% comes from international investors. Now over time, the total amount of investments from international investors totals, as of 2018, $3.5 trillion, which is a lot of money considering our whole residential market is about $7 trillion in total. Now the $3.5 trillion has different forms of investment. One is direct investment, when international companies come and set up an Australian subsidiary, or they come and join and invest in an Australian company. That's called direct investment. There's also portfolio investment, where international investors come and invest in our bonds or our shares. It's a bit like video 3 where we talked about financial markets and the real world. There's also another amount for derivatives and other investments as well, adding all to $3.5 trillion. Now can you guess who the biggest investor is into Australia at the moment? The answer is the US. The US has 27% of all the foreign investment in this country, followed by the UK, which has 16% of all the investment in this country. And the fifth investor is Hong Kong, and number 9 is China. Now, why does the US and the UK have so much investment? Well, in 1770, James Cook came and found Australia, and into the 1800s, late 1700s, there was a lot of investment over into Australia for roads and bridges. You had the colonized, and you had the convicts come over and help build the country up. Also, as we moved into the 1900s, the US emerged as the power, and in World War II, we formed a strong alliance with the US, and we had a lot of manufacturing investment come over here to help us provide bomber planes, radios, clothing, tin food to the US and over to the war. Subsequently to World War II, we've also had companies, through that late era there, came through with Holden and General Motors. There's a partnership there where there was foreign ownership of Holden, and they sold General Motors cars. And also ExxonMobil invested a whole $20 billion into the Bass Strait to pull out oil and to teach us the skills. And that's a good thing about investing from international partners, is that they teach us the skills, the managerial knowledge and know-how, and of course they gave us the money to expand our economy and grow that investment portion of our GDP. Now there's also real estate, which has had quite an investment, direct investment, and last year the two biggest investors was the US still, which had $37 billion invested. Now the US would largely, $20 billion went into service companies, and that's a lot of what we're talking about. For example, Cisco has joined up with the city of Adelaide in creating a smart city as well. You saw Costco set up their big warehouses, not just in Melbourne, but they've done so across Australia. So these are direct investments also into the real estate area, but also into other areas of the economy. Now, China, on the other hand, last year invested or got approvals to invest $24 billion, and $13 billion was into real estate. Now, China, overall, the investment approvals were for 24% were for residential and 76% for commercial. So it's not just residential investment that the approvals have been gotten for. Now, remember, out of the 3.5 trillion, only 1 trillion is direct investment, and direct investment is good for the country because it often stays here. The other one is portfolio investment. Portfolio investment is a lot more flimsy. It can come and go because, and we spoke about this in our third video, you've got bonds and shares. Now, $1.3 trillion of foreign money has come into our bond market, which is a lot of money considering the whole market is only $2.3 trillion in size. Into the share market, we've received $500 billion from foreign investors, which is a lot considering it's about $1.6 trillion in size. And that money can come and go as they please, as they wish to buy into the markets or not buy into the markets. Now, overall, yes, we have 3.5 trillion invested from foreigners here, but we have invested 2.5 trillion overseas into foreign markets and foreign investments as well. And a big part of that would be our superannuation money. We have a lot of superannuation money now, about $2.7 trillion December last year. So we're investing overseas as well. So the impact, the net amount, 3.5 is invested here, 2.5 we invest over there, it's 1 trillion roughly. And that's about our foreign debt. Our foreign debt's about $1 trillion. 950 billion is owed from companies. 200 billion is owed from our government. Our banks owe about 50 billion because our banks do source funding from overseas as well. About 30% of their funding comes from wholesale markets or overseas markets. And that's part of the money that we get in mortgages that they lend out to us. Households have actually given more money overseas than they've received from overseas. So overseas people owe our households money overall. Now, of course, all this money that we've received, that $1 trillion in foreign debt that we have, every investor wants to receive a return. So the foreign investors either want dividends from shares that they've invested in companies or direct investments they have in the companies, or they're going to want some interest repayments on the amount they've loaned us. So there's going to be an outflow of money for dividends and interest, and that outflow last year totaled $62 billion. So we had $62 billion of an outflow last year for that. Now, we've spoken about the investments. Let's talk about our customers and our exports. In the exports, our biggest customer is China, our second is Japan, and our third is Europe. In terms of what we're exporting, a big portion is resources. 58% of all our exports are resources and 21% are services. You can think about people that come over here for education or they come and travel here. They're our services that we're exporting overseas. Now, China, 30%, and we talk about resources. Resources has been a massive story in Australia. Back in the 1850s, we had a gold rush, an incredible gold rush, and that brought lots of migration into the country, lots of money into the country. And a lot of the time, the migrants and so on stay here, increases our population. As we know, that's a key driver in our gross domestic product, in our economy. Similar thing happened. Up until 2012, we had an incredible 10 years or so of investment into mining. You can see direct investment into mining is our biggest investment at the moment. 38% of all direct investment from foreigners is in mining. And from the mid-2000s, we had China really increasing the amount they invested into the mining sector. And they were buying a lot of resources. Now think about this. If our biggest investor and our biggest financier is the US, and our biggest customer is China, we kind of want them to get along. So this puts us in the middle here in that sense as well. So that's something to think about with how things are going at the moment. We have a situation where we are selling so much overseas in comparison to what we're buying. We have a net inflow of money of $22 billion. So 22 came in, we sent out $62 billion in interest and dividends. The net outflow was around $40 billion, which adds to our foreign debt. So this is the situation we're in. In the next video, I'll talk about the advantages, disadvantages. Of course, when you have money coming into the country, that's a great thing. And we are one of the most popular countries for millionaires. Last year, we had the most millionaires migrate to the country, which is great. We sell them permanent visas for about $5 million. So we've got a country where people want to travel to, great infrastructure, clean air, great schools. People want to be here and live here. We've had a resource mining boom. We've created lots of jobs. We've received lots of money. We've increased our gross domestic product from that resources boom. From the 80s, we've seen interest rates globally come down and reduce, which makes it less expensive for us to be borrowing money. We're in a situation where the country as a whole is in a very lucky situation, yet we still have $40 billion that is adding as an outflow overall. So we'll discuss in the next video the certain factors for that and the reason for that.